people. Welcome back to the podcast from our radio show here at Bobo 89.1 FM. I'm Bella Rooney, your host, and today we're chatting with Jane Hakkonsson. Is that how you say
Pretty
it?
close.
Okay. DOE's Research Officer from the Terrestrial Resources Unit, and Tim Austin, DOE's Deputy Director and Overseer of Marine and Terrestrial Research and Conservation Programs. Good morning, Jane and Tim. Thanks so much for coming in and taking time from your busy days to talk to us about the Coastal Bird Conservation Proposal Project. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm too chipper. I know. You guys are so tired. You're like, oh, blah, blah. I'm like, I'll put some energy into you this morning. So you guys have both done so much, and you both have so much experience in working in conservation, obviously, at the Department of Environment. And we're here today to talk about the proposed Seabird Conservation Plan. Before we get into that, and its many parts, let's just start by getting to know you. So Jane, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how you've found yourself now involved in this proposal.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I think it's really important to discuss this plan. I'm really happy to be here today. And I am a research officer with the Department of Environment. So I work in the Terrestrial Resources Unit, which means I do pretty much everything that's not marine.
Okay.
So the department is historically a very marine-focused department, but the newer parts of it includes the terrestrial environment. So I'm part of that. And I studied zoology back in the UK. I did a master's at Edinburgh University. I've been on island for almost 15 years, and I've worked with the department for almost 10, I think, now. So, yes, that's a little bit about me.
Cool.
I guess it's my turn.
It's your turn.
Yeah. Obviously, I grew up in Cayman. I always wanted to do marine sciences and had the good fortune to have some parents that supported me to do that. So I went off to the UK and got a degree in marine biology and zoology, and then masters in oceanography, and kept working at the Tropical Marine Research Unit at the University of York, which is kind of a strange place to be studying tropical marine sciences.
It seems a bit odd.
Eventually came back to Cayman in 1995, and I've been with the Department of Environment ever since. So my background is primarily in the marine sciences, but unfortunately it kind of progressed through. I have much more of a desk job now, looking after the research and assessment section, and other people go out and do the exciting stuff. Yeah, and I push the paper around the desk these days. But yeah, been with the department for like 25 years doing this, so a lot has experienced a lot during that time.
And I guess seabirds are considered part of the marine environment, right?
This is actually perfect. I was just thinking about it because they are, cross ecosystem animals, so they do live off the land and the sea. So.
Yeah, they're perfect little hybrids.
Exactly.
So let's get into this then. The proposed Seabird Conservation Plan, it aims to protect 6 species of native nesting seabirds across the Cayman Islands. So that's our brown boobies, our red-footed boobies, magnificent frigate birds, our white-tailed tropical birds, our least terns, our bridal terns. Can you give us the 101 on coastal birds? Why are all of these so important to our ecosystems and our heritage here in Cayman?
How long have you got?
Oh my gosh, well.
An hour?
Good point, because they're all so different.
Well, yeah, so seabirds, I think maybe we should start with what is a seabird, right?
Sure,
because
yeah.
that might be, a good place to start, because people usually know that a ching-ching or a banana quid is not necessarily a seabird, but is an egret a seabird, or is a heron a seabird? The answer is that they are not. So I think there are 359 species of seabird in the world, and it is like the fastest declining group of birds in the world. Because, of course, we can talk about the threats later on, but they face threats both on the ocean, but also on land. So they get sort of a double whammy of all the issues that we have, including climate change, of course. So out of these 359 species, we have 6 that breed in significant numbers in the Cayman Islands. That is not including the brown pelican that nested recently in Malportas Pond. So obviously, these are the big colonies that have been here for all of these years and that we're trying to protect. And the reason is that seabirds are just intrinsically important to ocean health, to terrestrial ecosystems, because they are, as we touched on earlier, kind of the only species that traverses the ecosystems in that way, and they transport nutrients from the open ocean, the pelagic oceans, and the coastal environments into the terrestrial environments. They're pretty much like a flagship species, if you will, on what is a healthy ocean. And the reason is that they're much easier to study time and again compared to everything that lives in the ocean, because they are visible. So things like you can put GPS trackers on them, and when they rest on the ocean surface, they will be opportunistic drifters. We can learn about currents. We can learn about fish stock. We know culturally that these birds' populations have been extremely important for nutrients, both when eggs were harvested, when the first colonizers came to the island, but also in terms of leading fishermen to where the fish are. You know, everyone will know that when you see the frigate birds, you know, something is going on in the ocean. But also leading sailors back to land. So that has been a big part culturally and historically. So these seabirds have a long-standing history with people. And, you know, it's really been a one-way system, us exploiting them, as it were. So it really is our duty to protect them. They were here way before us. So why shouldn't we, you know, do our bit to protect them?
Especially since we're just getting rid of them currently, just not helping them to survive and keep their duties to us that they do, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I guess on that, the current 6 species, what are the population sizes that we have, or any of the data that we have on that we know are now they need our help?
Yeah, so we have historic data, mainly from Patricia Bradley in a book called Seabirds of the Caribbean.
Cool.
That's kind of one of the main sources of historic data. But of course, recently, since the Terrestrial Resources Unit came into effect, we've had a chance to look at some more current data, which unfortunately shows that pretty much all of our seabird species are in decline. But we can kind of tell that just by virtue of, you know, the range is so short or so small.
Yeah.
And all of the seabirds that we have in the Cayman Islands are restricted to very few places now where they still nest. So if we start on Little Cayman, because it's kind of the most obvious, most people know about the Booby Pond, which is a Ramsar site and partly protected by the National Trust. And behind the Booby Pond, you'll know that there's a lot of birds going on there. Like there's a whole nesting frenzy, and that's basically the frigate birds and the red-footed boobies. And their populations are in decline, but they're still by far the most numerous nesting seabirds that we have here. So in 2018, our last count was around 1,000 frigate birds and around 5,000 boobies.
Okay.
And these are numbers, we can talk more if you want later about how we get to these numbers, because that's actually quite cool too, because it's very different. But on Cayman Brac, unfortunately, we're down to less than 50 pairs of brown boobies.
Less than 50?
Less than 50 pairs. And every year we see adults and chicks being predated on by invasive mammals, especially cats, but rats as well. And it's just, it's a real problem. So just in the few years that I've been involved, I've seen them just really go downhill. So that's a very scary thing to watch as a natural resource manager.
Yeah.
And then we have the white-tailed tropic bird. So the white-tailed tropic bird nests on Cayman Brac and Grand Cayman. And it does so in the sheer cliff faces, so on the side of the cliffs, but also slightly inland from the bluff sides. So on Cayman Brac, let me see here what we got. The last couple of counts have had around 30 to 35 nests on Cayman Brac, which, it doesn't sound like a lot, and it really isn't. But it's even worse on Grand Cayman because, as you know, we don't have a lot of bluff on Grand Cayman. And the only place that they really do nest is around the Pedro St. James
That's what
area.
I was thinking. That must be the only area, right?
On both sides of that. And there's between 5 to 15 pairs left. Wow. Yeah, and obviously not all of them are successful either, because as we encroach on that bluff, we bring rats and other invasive species with us. And, of course, when they're just sat there, the eggs, they're really, really vulnerable to predation.
Yeah.
And then that leaves us with the two tern species that we have, the bridled tern that lives on Vidal Key, and the least tern. The least tern, it should be said, nests pretty opportunistically in quarries and elsewhere. But in this plan, we're just focusing on Sand Key, which is just a little key off of South Sound. I'm sure you're aware or are familiar with it. And so we have around 230 and upwards adults on Sand Key of least terns, and the bridal terns is around 50 to 75 adults. It fluctuates. Sometimes they go and nest other places too, but that's around what we're looking at for those populations in recent years.
Yeah. Do they this might be a silly question. Do they migrate to us during seasons, or are they
Yeah,
always
so
here?
they're not always
Okay.
here. They come in and they
Okay.
breed, yes.
Oh,
But that's
okay.
a good question because the brown boobies, they stay around.
They're here all
As
round.
do the red-footed and the frigates, but the white-tailed tropic bird only really come in at Christmas time, and the terns also come to breed, but during the summer.
Okay. That's good to know because I don't see them all the time. So I was kind of like, oh.
But and to be honest, that's one of the things that usually classifies a seabird is that they live longer, but they also travel further than most other
Right.
birds. Like albatrosses, I think,
Yes.
is the best known seabirds, and there's a few species, and they can travel up to 75,000 miles a year.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
yeah, it's crazy.
And it's crazy to think that some of the birds are coming from different, countries of different conditions to ours. They're already
Right.
so could be negatively impacted coming from a different country. Then they come to us,
Absolutely.
and we have to give them a good place
We
to
do.
lay their eggs.
We do. We
like a
do.
nice little home base.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all this being said, we have the National Conservation Council, and these are, from what I understand, the people who are kind of putting this proposal together. Is that correct? Could you just tell us a little bit more about that, Tim? And who are they? What is their role in all this?
So yeah, this is quite complicated. So in 2013, the National Conservation Act was passed in the Legislative Assembly, or Parliament as it is now, and gradually the parts of the law have been coming into effect. But the National Conservation Act allows for the appointment of a National Conservation Council.
Okay.
And that council has 13 members on it, and of which 5 of them are statutory appointed, including my post. My role at DOE as Deputy Director is one of those posts. So there's 2 people from the Department of Environment, which is the Director, and then myself, the Deputy Director. Then there's a representative from Agriculture, a representative from Planning, and a representative from the National Trust.
Okay.
There are then 8 other members that are appointed by Cabinet from a list and certain criteria. They have to represent the 7 or 8 geographic districts, including the sister islands. They have to have scientific backgrounds for 4 of them. So basically, the council's made up of people with relatively strong scientific and conservation credentials, and they obviously meet regularly, and they are, in effect, the people that put the National Conservation Act into the various motions that it needs to be. And some of that is, of course, of those duties are delegated to the Department of Environment. And it's the Department of Environment that's currently leading this drive to put the proposal together
I got it. Okay.
for the seabirds. And that comes actually through Section 17 of the law that mandates that everything that's listed, everything that's protected, which is listed in Schedule 1 of the National Conservation Law, there are 2 parts of that part. One, which are species that are protected at all times, which in fact are the seabirds. They are already protected under the Animals Law, so by default they move to Part 1. So they're protected at all times. And then there's Part 2 species, which aren't protected at all times. So say, for instance, conch, they're bag limits, and they're on Part 2 because you are allowed to take those occasionally.
Right.
So the law requires that all of the species that are listed on that schedule should have a conservation plan.
I see.
So we're now meeting the requirements. And obviously there are a lot of things on that list, and so we're making our way down it, but we must focus on the priority species.
Yeah.
And seabirds obviously are a priority species. And so with the National Conservation Council is overseeing the process by which this conservation plan, the species conservation plan, is going through the various hoops and hurdles that it has to do under the law. So,
Right.
And we're currently in the middle of that process now with the end of the public consultation.
Because nothing is easy, right?
Nothing is easy.
Nothing good can happen.
And the
easily.
National Conservation Act went to great lengths to make sure that it was really an inclusive, always sought public consultation. The council has to meet in public, so our general meetings are held in view of the public, so that the whole thing is really meant to be very transparent and to seek public input in a lot of the areas that impact the law. So it's quite good in that regard, but it makes it a cumbersome process to navigate.
And we're going to come back to the public consultation bit because I think that that's such an important part of conservation because it can't just be made by the top tier of our governing bodies. It has to be included
completely agree,
with people living with the animals, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. So we're going to come back to that, but like you mentioned, the birds themselves are actually protected under the National Conservation Act, right? So it's their nesting sites that are at risk. if I'm understanding that right. So what are the threats actually affecting these sites? I think you mentioned mammals and maybe feral cats.
Yeah, so if we're talking just about the land side, although let's not forget that when the birds are mostly out at sea, obviously everything that is affecting the sea, which is overfishing and pollution, and including also severe weather, so climate change is a big problem. But also bycatch is a huge issue for seabirds all around the globe.
Wow, really?
Yeah, in fisheries, like commercial fisheries, right? So like they get caught in the nets and they get taken as a bycatch. So I think that's one of the top 3 threats for seabirds globally is bycatch. So we have all of these issues at sea, and a lot of the times the birds are not within the Cayman borders, as it were. We've put trackers on the birds and on the red-footed and the frigates, and we found they go to Jamaica. The frigates go all the way to New Orleans, down the coast of Mexico. So they travel way beyond what we can protect here.
Of course, yeah.
So, of course, what we are trying to do is we're trying to protect when the birds are most vulnerable, which is when they come to roost and nest, and they do that on land, and that's what we're focusing on in this plan. And so on land, we have multiple threats. The highest threat globally to seabirds and in the Cayman Islands would be invasive mammals.
Yeah.
And that we're talking mostly rats and cats here, but it could be dogs, of course, as well. And reptiles, invasive reptiles. We obviously are very familiar with the green iguana, and the green iguana likes to go into rock holes and crevices. We haven't recorded egg predation, but it is bound to be happening.
I see, okay.
Especially as the green iguana population gets more out of control on Cayman brack as well. So we have all of the predatory risks. And then, of course, we have general disturbance. And it could be everything from light pollution to, people wanting to go on kayak to Sand Key during nesting season, and all of these things.
Right.
Habitat loss is a big problem too, because as well the property prices have gone up really, really high, and these areas are usually overlooking the oceans that the birds like to use, and those are, as you know, like the prime real estate. So we're kind of battling, some of these big things, but it really can be done kind of together. We don't have to stop development to protect the seabirds. We just have to be mindful about what we're doing and where we're doing it, and that's kind of what we're hoping to do with this plan.
Cool. Now that is interesting, right? Because we have to keep tourism and all that stuff alive, but that should not be impacting.
Of course, but
natural.
also there are landowners, that have valuable land, and we're not trying to take any of that value away. By any means. So it's just a matter of figuring out, how can we do all of this together? And we feel that this plan is a step in the right direction.
That's exciting. I think that's super exciting. So how do you actually survey these seabird species? And how do you get their population numbers? Because I had talked to you a little bit about this before, and you were like, oh, this is super exciting stuff that we're doing.
Yes, I wanted to mention that mainly because, there's so many different types of seabirds, and so therefore their habits and their nesting habits are really quite different as well, which means we have to use very different methodologies.
Oh, cool.
So, for example, the Booby Pond has arboreal seabirds. Arboreal means they live in the trees and they roost in the trees, which looks, just completely stupid. When you look at their webbed little feet trying to grab onto a little branch, you're like, what are you doing? How is this working for you? But they do, and they have done so successfully for, so many years. And what we've tried to do is do ground surveys as part of a Darwin grant in 2016 was our first seabird Darwin grant with Liverpool University and Exeter University as well. And we did ground surveys, which was really, really hard going to get behind the Booby Pond. We're talking mud, mosquitoes, feces, lots of guano.
Oh.
I think Fede got hit in the mouth one day. Like it's not good. You're looking up, right? You're trying to count these birds. It's complicated. So we also ran the drone, and we have a brand new drone now actually, to see if we could actually detect the nests from above. And if the birds were going to be scared off, what was the impact of running a drone? So we ran those surveys for that entire Darwin grant. So that was 16 to 18 or 16 to 19.
Solid time.
Yeah, and yes, and we found that the drone was indeed, a very, very good way of surveying these arboreal species. And now we've got a new drone, which means we can get a higher resolution image. We can stitch the images together. We can georeference them, so we can put them in ArcGIS. We know exactly where each nest is, so we get a coordinate as well.
Cool.
And we can actually tell the species apart. So we can see, oh, that's a frigate bird nest. That's a red-footed booby nest. We do have to count them manually, but it's a lot easier to sit and do that in the AC with your cup of coffee, looking at your computer screen.
On your sofa.
than being stuck in the mud and losing your shoes like every half hour.
No, that sounds better.
So that has worked really well, and we're still perfecting that. And we're going to do another survey in January, February is usually when we go and fly the booby pond. And we also have actually used drones for inaccessible areas like the lighthouse bluff on the Brack. So it has been very treacherous and very dangerous for us to survey the Brack booby on foot on the bluff, because sometimes they nest on the ledges and you have to kind of go out to the edge and look over. And sometimes, once I looked down and I could see the water between my feet because I was out on a ledge and I didn't know.
Oh, no.
And so I'm like, no, let's do this by drone.
Yeah, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Exactly. So we definitely are using the drone a lot for the brown boobies, but for the brown boobies that nest on the shore and on Long Beach, we have a dedicated team of volunteers on the Brack that go out every week during the breeding season and record if it's a male or female sitting on the nest. Is there an egg? When does the baby fledge? So we do ground and drone for the Brack brown boobies. Now for the white-tailed tropic birds, that's actually very difficult because they're very elusive. You only ever see them when they come in to nest, and you actually hear them before you see them.
Oh.
I don't know if you're familiar with what they look like, but they are just this flimsy bits of white long feathers against the clear blue sky or a little bit of cloud, and you lose track of them. Yeah, they're beautiful birds. Yeah. But really, you have to sit and watch the cliffside for them to come in, and if you're lucky, you see them, go in through the crevices. Oh, and that's the only reason there's a nest, and you have to catch them right at the right time of day. And so it's difficult. And we have some really dedicated volunteers.
No kidding.
that help us on the Brack, and then we do it ourselves. The DOE does it ourselves here on Grand Cayman, having a look at the nesting population. So it's literally finding the individual nests for the tropic birds.
My gosh, that's like a whole thing.
It is a whole thing.
That's a lot of manpower. That's a lot of dedication from lots of volunteers. Thank you, guys.
But it's so beautiful when you do see them. I mean, it really does make up for all of it when you do see them. Especially if they're able to nest successfully.
Are you able to tell individuals, or is that almost too much?
Well, they're pretty site fidelity. They have site fidelity, so
they like to come back to the same spot.
Back to the same spot, and also because there are so few spots on Grand Cayman where they can nest, so we assume that those are the same individuals that come back year after year.
That's cool.
And then for the terns, we can't really use drones for them because they get really wary, so they take off when you approach the keys.
Like the sound?
The sound, even if you approach on a boat or anything like that. Yeah, they all flush. But we do go onto the keys, and we have to look very closely. You can see in the conservation plan, if you get a hold of it, there's pictures in there too of all the eggs and everything.
Oh, brilliant.
The bridal tern nests underneath rock crevices, so even if you had a drone, you wouldn't be able to see it because you have to sort of get down and look under the rock outcrops to even be able to see the eggs that are also very well camouflaged.
Right, of course. Good.
So it's a thing for the terns. You have to kind of be there in person. Wow. And we go and do maybe a 20-minute survey to ensure that the eggs don't overheat, or if they're chicks, they don't overheat, so we can go and, be efficient, get out of there, minimal disturbance, and then we have the number within. We can do vital key in half a day and sand key in half a day. So that's once a year. So that's not too bad.
That's not too bad.
No.
I mean, hopefully it'll be harder because there'll be more of them in the future, right? Hopefully you'll be like, no, I had to take a week or something. But okay, well, these nesting sites are then just critical for them, right? So
exactly.
Where are you actually hoping to protect with this? I know we have habitat in the Booby Pond Nature Reserve in Little Cayman. Is that all that's actually currently protected, or are there more? And what else are you trying to protect?
Well, I can take that one. So when the Booby Pond in Little Cayman is currently a protected site, under the National Conservation Act, it was actually passed over as an animal sanctuary.
Oh, brilliant.
And under the law, that stayed in effect. So Booby Pond is protected, and I believe then the National Trust owns to the north, and that's protected under the National Trust's law or Act as they are now. The rest of the sites are, and I think Jane will be able to elaborate on where they are, because it's quite difficult to describe without looking at a map.
Yeah.
So they will become critical habitat, and you use that term, and that's defined in the law, and that is in effect a protected area as well, and it allows the similar kind of leverage that the National Conservation Act can bring to a protected area onto the critical habitat of these species. So that's actually a technical term in the law.
Critical habitat.
Critical habitat.
Okay. Instead of just protected area. Right.
It's a confusing term, because a lot of people think, the critical habitat of the bird is like obviously the sea, everything. But it's actually it's really very closely defined. It's an area that the bird needs, that is critical to its survival. So it's not the entire habitat or anything like that. So it's really a very closely defined thing, and you obviously need to look at maps and the various criteria that are used to describe it in order to see them. But that then becomes the protected area for that bird.
I gotcha.
But the Booby Pond is an entire protected area on its own. So it has seabirds in it, so the necessity for critical habitat is slightly less, because the area is already protected.
And vital key is protected.
Vital key
already
also,
as
that's
well.
right, yeah.
Oh, and that's, Oh, okay. See, I didn't know all this jargon.
Yeah, it is a lot of jargon, and it's a lot to get your head around, but it looks like it's working as a process for us at the moment. So.
I think it's also worth to maybe mention that it's not all species that lend themselves to critical habitat. When you have a species that is very widespread, and you can find it in West Bay as well as in Bodentown and East End, those kinds of species don't lend themselves well to the protection of critical habitat. Because
one area.
In effect, the whole island is their critical habitat if they're endemic and found nowhere else.
Right.
Yeah, so at the moment, the other critical habitat that exists through an interim directive is for sea turtles. So any of the beaches on the Cayman Islands that have a certain threshold of nesting, we've managed to define that as critical habitat. Obviously, that's critical to the survival of the species, because the turtles need that specific area. So that's quite easy to define. And so a lot of the beaches around the island are defined as critical habitat. And that's important, because it then allows the National Conservation Council, in its consultation with other agencies that are giving permission for various things, planning department, and any other activities that are taking place, that you need to consult with the council to, before permission is given. And in that review, we are able to, if it's a critical habitat, to have a little bit more weight. Usually the council would make recommendations, but in cases where they're critical habitat, they're able to direct, which is, i.e., this is what will happen rather than this is what should happen.
I see.
So it's very important.
That is very important, because then you're controlling the situation, right? Rather than. I wish we could just make the whole island critical habitat. Wouldn't that just be sublime?
A few people may raise eyebrows at that one.
I'm sure they would. Maybe I'm a dreamer. But so what areas beyond the ones that we have are we hoping to make critical?
I'm going to let Jane answer that, because she's been working very closely with this.
Yeah, so it's if anyone is listening and you want to have a look at these maps, it just makes more sense to look at the maps, because it's
I'm going to include them in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, so if you go on conservation.ky, which is the National Conservation Council's website, there is a protected area and protected species. And if you click on protected species, you'll get to the Seabird Conservation Plan. There's also a landowner's FAQ. There's a white-tailed tropic bird report. There's various resources in there that will hopefully help answer any questions that people may have. But if you have any questions that's not answered, or you want to talk about this plan, do feel free to reach out, of course, to us at the department. But if you go on that plan, you'll see the maps are outlined there for the critical habitat delineations. And I believe the first one is the brown booby critical habitat, and that's on page 9 at the bottom. You'll see there's a red line, which is a 50-foot buffer, which basically runs from the edge of the bluff and inland.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so like if you're familiar with the BRAC, there's the Lighthouse Trail.
Yep.
And so it's pretty much on the right-hand side of that Lighthouse Trail as you're heading towards Peter's Cave, for example.
Okay.
And so it runs from pretty much where the trail goes off to Peter's Cave, back to the lighthouse, around the tip of the bluff, and down to the south, pretty much to where Great Cave is.
Oh, great.
Right.
Awesome.
So that's that for the and then Long Beach as well for the browns. Now the the brown boobies also nest on the south coast, but the numbers have been dwindling so much, and it's in areas people are developing, and there's so many cats, and so we have not included any of the south coast stretch in this plan. So that's that for the brown boobies, and then when you look at, I think it's page number 12 of the Seabird Conservation Plan, you'll see what is delineated as critical habitat for the white-tailed tropic birds. And that has a map both of Cayman brack at the top and of Grand Cayman at the bottom. And so pretty similar to the brack boobies, it's that bluff side, but further down the island. So, it's not kind of out towards the sea, it's that, how do you call it, like that half bluff, where you have land at the bottom, and then, so both north and south coast.
Okay.
Because that's where the majority of the white-tailed tropic bird nests are. It is not where all of them are. We do have tropic bird nests all along that stretch of coastline on both the north and the south, but we just, cannot protect all of that. It's not feasible, and it's not doable, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
So what we are trying to do here is exactly what Tim was saying. There's a threshold of nests, and we're trying to look at really what is critical to these birds for the future. So it's not all of them, and it is specified in the plan where other nests are as well.
Oh, great.
And then on Grand Cayman, we're talking about that area around Pedro St. James,
Yes.
where we have the only bluff in Grand Cayman,
in Grand Cayman.
and slightly to the east of that site as well. So this is where the 5 to 15 birds have been seen over the years, and really is critical to any long-term sustainable population of white-tailed tropic birds on Grand Cayman.
So when you say buffer, you said 50-meter buffer. What is that in terms of development area that you cannot develop?
Yes,
near
it's 50 feet.
50 feet, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And it runs from the edge.
Yes.
So literally from the physical edge of the bluff and inland.
Okay.
And the reason is that a lot of the birds, also the white-tailed tropic birds, will nest in the crevices in the karst.
Okay.
So you'll literally find them in little tiny holes down in there.
I see.
And you are correct. So within that critical habitat, there are certain rules, and all the rules are outlined after each species map. And primarily, it is not to bulldoze the karst. I mean, that's really, and not to disturb the vegetation.
Right.
So it's pretty much kind of a leave it alone zone.
Right, exactly. As it should be.
Yes.
Well, I don't think you should really develop all the way to the edge of the bluff.
You might
not want that.
Going for a jump, really, if you do that, right?
Yeah, and I think that it is really critical to kind of, even for the aesthetics of the islands and the country, too, because it is just such a spectacular landscape.
It's
and
beautiful.
Certainly if I was a landowner, I would love to see it in its natural beauty than trying to bulldoze it.
Brack needs protection. I fully believe Brack needs all the protection we can give it. So this is that all the spaces? That's all the habitats?
Let me just have a quick look. No, so there is the keys as well, right? But but Sandkey, I believe, is in the process of being gazetted as a protected area. And so we have a red sort of circle around Sandkey, mostly because it is a sand key.
Right, exactly.
And it moves over time. So it's kind of a diameter that we have delineated. And then Vital Key off of the coast of Barkers is already a protected area, but we're also designating it as a critical habitat. Yes.
I got you. Okay, now I'm understanding the protected and the critical talk here. That makes so much sense. So this is all wonderful, and we really need to get it in place. And right now it's called proposed, right? It's the proposed plan. And I guess my question is, so I just came from COP, and there's lots of promises made, and I'm not saying you guys aren't going to keep your promises, right? I just want to know, does that mean that this is a draft of a plan? And if so, how long do you expect it will take for this actual plan to be put into place? And do you think the species will actually have enough time for that?
So the National Conservation Act is very prescriptive in the process that we must follow to do this.
Yeah.
And we're on that process now. So the very first time, basically the council decided that, we're going to make this proposal. We've written it. We've taken it to the council. We've now gone out to public consultation. The law requires that you must let the public know that we're doing this. You must publish 2 adverts in the newspaper, in local newspapers, stating what species you're working, what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Tell people where you can find copies of the plan. Typically, as Jane mentioned, the website conservation.ky, but we have them in the office. And then the public are given, I think then, I've gone blank on how long, but there's a period of time, which we actually ended up extending.
You did to November 11th, right?
Yeah. So we kept that process going so that we could really make sure that this plan had been completely reviewed by public. The public are invited to make comments any way they like, email us. We've also conducted an online survey just to see how people felt about the whole business. And these are all the requirements under the law, perhaps not the survey, but at least to really make sure that you go to the public to get the input.
Great.
The public consultation now closed, and the council now has 28 days to review those comments, to make any changes or recommendations that they feel may be necessary. So we will update the plan to make sure we take those into account. And of course, any objections, we need to list all of those as well.
Right.
Once that's done, and it goes up to the Ministry for Environment, which is actually where they put the kind of paper together.
Right.
And then that goes to Cabinet.
Okay.
That obviously can sometimes take time, but in order to safeguard this process, there is in fact a 60-day limit. So from the day that the recommendation to adopt the plan is made to the Ministry and on to Cabinet, the Cabinet has 60 days to either say yes or no. Okay, if they choose not to say anything, the council is able to put the plan into effect. So it's it's a kind of a safeguard to make sure. Basically, if we hear nothing from the Cabinet, the plan can come into effect by being gazetted, a public notice to say it's come into effect. So there is a mechanism. Now, of course, Cabinet has 60 days. They could come back and, having looked at the plan, seen the objections, seen the comments, seen the recommendations, they need to state reasons why it should not come into effect.
Okay.
So they need to be clear about that. It's not just a blanket, no, it can't come. There needs to be good and solid reasons why. And obviously that can happen. So we're not at that point yet, but that would be typically the next potential delay if there was to be one.
Okay. So that's really good to know. Because it's such a process. And sometimes as somebody just living and watching it happen, you just feel kind of helpless and not understanding where the time limits are, especially if you're a bird lover, right? Like, I'm slowly becoming a bird lover. I've never not liked birds, but I'm slowly starting to really just understand and appreciate them. And I'm like, oh my God, this needs to happen like yesterday. So it's really good to know that that's the process and that they actually have safeguards in.
Yeah, it does. Good. I mean, but obviously, if the Cabinet have issues or want to address some of the objections, there is, that mechanism is built in there. So.
Right. Brilliant. Yeah. So in terms of that consultation, are you able to share anything that you found from the public consultation? Any of the findings?
We should also mention that we had public meetings.
Oh, that's a good point.
So we had 3 public meetings.
Okay.
The first on November 1st with these climbers of Cayman Brac, or the climbing community, so as a separate stakeholder engagement. And then we had a meeting in Cayman Brac, a public meeting on the 7th of November by the Lighthouse. And then again on the 8th of November, the following day, we had a public meeting at Pedro. And we had a pretty good turnout. More people on Cayman Brac than on Grand. So that was interesting. And I think we had 117 responses to the public consultation online.
Great.
And primarily, they've been positive responses. The most negative responses have been landowners that have been worried that we're going to take people's land away, that we're going to dictate X, Y, and Z. And so we've really we put together a landowner FAQ.
I saw that,
which is on the conservation.ky
I'll link that too.
Just to kind of settle, the alarm bells really for a lot of people. Just, trying to explain what the process is and everything else. So I think overall it has been very, like yourself, there's a lot of young people now that are starting to see the big picture and what's happening to our islands. And so I think a lot of those have been very vocal. And so overall, we had a very positive response.
Good.
And the individual landowners that have contacted us, we've done everything in our power to engage and give the information in a timely manner. But if there's anyone out there listening that have questions and concerns, please do feel free to reach out to us because this, cannot happen without public buy-in and without, the public being on board.
Of course.
nor would we want it to. You know,
Yeah.
you can't save what you don't love. So
That's exactly it. You have to protect what you love, right?
Right.
And you can't care if you don't know about issues
that's
like
true.
this. I really do fully believe that. So I guess my last kind of question is, well, last-ish question. How can the public help with this beyond a public consultation? Is there any way other than volunteer?
We had a little conversation about that, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, the public can be involved in so many ways. I mean,
Okay.
first of all, just getting to know that the fact that the plan exists.
Yes,
and
right.
learning about it, and so that you know the rules and regulations yourself.
Yeah.
But then there are plenty of things that obviously the plan sets out some of the conditions that should be met if these things come into effect. So abiding by the law would be a big part. But then simple things like, just appreciating, getting to know what's out there, go and see these birds. I think, bird watching, you mentioned how spectacular it is. It is very impressive to see these species. And then obvious things like keeping your cat indoors at night,
Right.
keeping your dog on a leash, staying away from the nests, abiding by the rules. And I think there's probably quite a lot more that they can do as well.
Yeah, I want to just mention just for the keys, because when they obviously don't nest all at the same time, but it is important that between May 1st and August 31st that you stay off of Sand Key, and pretty much the same months off of Vital Key.
Okay.
1 month less, so May 1st to July 31st, because that's when the birds are nesting. So
Right.
that's it's not, this plan has not come into effect now, so this is a strong recommendation from the department.
Of course.
Not to disturb these birds when they are nesting at
Nesting.
this point, because they are protected at all times.
Right.
So I think take under the law is disturb,
Yeah.
harass, and all of that. So just to be mindful, because we all like to kayak, we all like to get out, and you can still do that. Just don't set foot on those keys during those 3 and 4 months.
Just 3 to 4 months. Guys.
Yeah.
That's all we're asking for. It's not
Exactly.
that much, right?
But I think too, social media is so big these days, and people really do appreciate, good photos, beautiful footage. And so if you are out there and you are doing birding, spread the word and let people experience it. Not everyone has the fortune and good health to be able to go out and see these birds and experience it for themselves. So it's something we can really share, the passion, and through our social media, through word of mouth, and
100%. So my last question was, do you think we'll get to this in a timely manner that we can save the species? But to me, I kind of feel positive that we will. I kind of don't even need to ask you that question, because it seems like you both seem very positive about that, right?
Well, I feel optimistic about the plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if that goes through, that would be fantastic. But I do think there are still, as Jane mentioned, there's regional and global issues that still remain at large, and these species need to be considered, management as a regional species rather than, we make it great here, but then they fly off into trouble in other areas. So there are conservation, there are multilateral environmental agreements that try to deal with that, and Cayman's signatory to some of those.
Okay.
So that there are regional bodies looking at this. So I'm optimistic that we can make a difference, and I think that we've caught the problem early enough that there's still a chance to change. And we've had some good luck stories, or some good news stories in Cayman in the past, and
We have,
I'm hoping this is going to become one of them as well.
Ay, that's great. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess once this has gone through, it's a matter of then stretching our outreach to everybody, saying, this is what we did. What are you going to do? And kind of sticking our tentacles everywhere and getting everybody to hold on until we can all work together to make this a big solution for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
that's exactly right.
That's awesome, guys. Thank you so much. That's it. I'm out of questions. Do you have any questions for me? No? You don't have to. No?
It's been fantastic.
So thank you. I'm going to post all those resources under the show notes and links to all the websites, to all the papers, to everything, so that you guys listening out there can really dig into what they provide, because there's so many resources. It's absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, and for just spreading your passion and everything, your knowledge and your optimism. I'm very grateful for it.
Well, thanks so much for having us. It's been really great.
Yes, thank you. And to people who are listening, thanks so much. And of course, you can always reach out to the Department of Environment directly for any other elements. Doesn't have to be about seabirds, anything to do with conservation that you're interested in. DOE@gov.ky.
Perfect. And that's it. I feel very I feel like I've been taught a lot of things today. It's so insightful, and I'm rather hopeful we can make a difference. So thank you again to DMS Broadcasting and to Bobo 89.1 FM and to our silent sponsors and my pal Ryan Kirkaldy from Retrospekt Media, who's capturing all of this for you. Check out our filmed episodes over on YouTube and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Protecting Paradise KY. Also make sure to follow the DOE on all their socials at DOE Cayman for updates on this project. And you cannot care unless you know. So thanks so much for joining us.